morning. Today is the fourth day of first Adar and the 13th of February. So we said the two meanings to the word half. It can be either half, that it's this half and not that half, and it can be half, the halftime. The split in the middle is something in and of itself, and then it contains both halves. It has to contain something of both halves. It's a connector. It's a connector that contains both. So, let's see, where did this come from? V'nei shoresh Machatzit HaShekel v'inyono lemala. You have this? Okay. Sovel be'emet shnei perushim. It really, he says, it really does accept, it can be understood in both ways. V'chamuvan midivrei ha'rachu v'chen hu beraya me'emna parasha zu, as is understood from the words of Rav Chaim Vital, and from the Raya Mehemna we said on this parsha. This parsha is Kitisa. This parsha is the parsha of the half shekel. And now he quotes from the Raya Mehemna. And he says like this. This is not an easy passage. He says like this: Man Machatzit HaShekel. What is the half shekel? Iu kegon chatzi yahin. Now this is a play on words. He says it is like half of a hin. A hin is a wet measure, is a liquid measure in the Mikdash. You used it for different things. Chatzi yahin yain you gave in the what do we call them? The not jubilations, but the libations, right? So in the libations, it was half a hin of wine. But this is a play on words. Because how would you read this word if you were Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? No, you read it. That's cute. Very cute. Chatzi ahin, you would read it as half the hayin. Look at the word. It's hey, yud, nun. So in Aramaic, this could be the word hayin. Hayin means two hays. So what's two hays? What has two hays in it famously? Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hashem's name. So that's how he reads it. Chatzi yahin. Here I have another example of a chetzi, of a half. And there it's chatzi hahin. And I'm going to read it as chatzi hain. Half the hays. Or split chetzi yahin is like split the hays into two. And so he says, V'da vav memutza ben shnei hayin. And so what's splitting the hays into two? There's a letter vav in between. In God's four-letter name, there's yud, hey, vav, hey. So the hays are split in the middle by the vav. So what's the conclusion? That the Machatzit HaShekel, the half a shekel, is the letter vav in Hashem's name. How do you know that it's upper and lower? I don't know. It's between the hays. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. But it's between the hays. Whatever the hays signify. Okay. Maybe. Yeah. Could be. Okay. What you mean is like between the concealed and the revealed. Yeah. Right. Between the letters in Ima and the letters in the kingdom. Okay. Okay. That's one option, right? And it fits. But we'll see where he takes this. And then he says, Avna lemishkal ba. And then he says, it's a stone to weigh with it. Huh? What do you mean? It's a stone to weigh with it. What are you talking about? Da yud, 20 gira shekel, da yud vav daled. So these are two different things. The second one is it's a stone to weigh with it. What am I going to weigh with it? 10. The mishkal bayud, I'm going to weigh with it 10. What stone do I weigh with it 10? Is it what he's saying here? It's what we learned from the verse, that it says 20 gira shekel, that a shekel is 20 gira. Or like a gira is like a gram, so 20 grams. But that would be the half the way we understand the half. So there's the split in the middle, that's the Vav. And then he says the Yud is divided like into two. And it's one of those stones that you use on the scales that's based on gravity. Right? That's what he takes from the Raya Mehem. The Raya Mehem is actually longer, and I don't know if you can understand more from it. But that's basically what it says. It continues on to say, HaShekel lo yarbev. What does it mean that the wealthy will not add more than 10? Da'amud ha'emtzeita. That's the middle axis of the Sfirot. Lo yarbe al yud. He should not have more than 10. What do we learn from that? And listen to this. This is a Raya Mehemna. It's a very interesting connection. It says, what does it mean? The middle column should not have more than 10. V'hachi itmar b'sefer Yitzirah, and this is what it was said in the Book of Formation. Eser sfirot blima, eser v'lo achadasar. That there are 10 sfirot called blima. Blima means that they have no essence of their own. There's 10 and not 11. So that's what it means that Ashir lo yarbe. So we learned another big principle in Torah, which is that there are 10 sfirot. Ve'adal lo yamit. And what does it mean? That the poor will not give less than 10 geiras, less than half a shekel. Dat tzaddik lo yamit me'eser. K'ma da'at amar, eser v'lo teisha, Machatzit HaShekel diu yud. So the tzaddik will not give less than 10, as it says in the Book of Formation, 10 and not 9. What tzaddik is he talking about that has 10 and not 9? That has a tendency to go to 9, and not to, and he should still have 10. There's different interpretations. The simplest one is that he's talking about in the crown. In the crown, well, a little bit connected to what we saw, Arich has 9 sfirot instead of 10, and he's sometimes called a tzaddik. And
couldn't be the tzaddik sherala. Couldn't be the tzaddik sherala.
Maybe. So why would he have less than? Yeah, usually the Zohar is much more symbolic than that. Like he won't say tzaddik is tzaddik. He'll say tzaddik is some sfira, or it's some parzuf, or it's something. Anyway.
By the way, this person used all my lectures in pharmacy.
Yeah.
Talk with the importance of just wait and just this.
So,
Right.
So it's not so simple, because the Raisa you have to give more. You can't give. The Rabbanan at least. Weights. So now we'll see something that escapes us a lot with weights, and you'll want to go back to these scales, I'm telling you, when you see this.
I have them.
Oh, you still have them. But at home, you don't use them in the pharmacy. You'll want to go back to this. You'll want to do this every day, because when you hear what he has to say now, it's going to be very enlightening. Okay. So we have the two meanings. How are these two meanings? One we said is splitting down the middle, that's the Vav, that's splitting down Hey and Hey, the half and half. And the other one is that it's a stone that you put on the weights that has 10, and we derive this from the fact that it says, why did it say and give us this measure, that 20 geira in a shekel? So what is he saying basically? It's the Yud. And the Yud has two meanings. Either it's the letter Yud as a letter, and then it's equal to 10, or when I write out its filling, Yud Vav Daled, I get 20. So it's either this or that. It's the Vav or the Yud. That's basically what it comes down to. Okay. Where were we? שרוצה לומר, על דרך הפשוט, חצי ההין אינו סובל רק חצי אחד לבד. אבל אחר שמפרשו על דרך הסוד, כמו וו הממוצע בין שני ההין, אם כן הרי הוא כלול משני ההין, וכן מחצית השקל משני החצאים. Okay, so we explained this. והנה מתחילה יש לבאר העניין על דרך האלף שבמחצית השקל, על דרך הראשונה שבמחצית השקל, שרוצה לומר חצי השקל כפשוטו. So he says, let's first of all explain, what does it mean that half a shekel is exactly a half a shekel? That's what it means. Let's first explain the half part, instead of the splitting part. In order to understand this, now it gets, again, a little bit confusing, difficult, but it's not terrible. We have to first of all introduce this concept in Eitz Chaim from the Arizal. This is part of his, again, his reimagining of everything that's in the Zoharic literature in order to get something that makes sense with the different passages, can contain all the different passages. And so the Arizal builds Partzufim. He doesn't talk about single Sfirot. He talks about conglomerations of Sfirot. So what he says is basically when the Zohar mentions a Sfirah, it's not talking about a Sfirah, it's talking about a Partzuf. We talked about this. It's talking about a persona. And that persona has an entire melee of 10 Sfirot itself. Now, two of these personas are called Za and Nukva. We talked about this, right? Two of the personas are the small continents, Za, Zer and Pin, and its female counterpart. Those in general represent the ideation of man, of God inside man. That's what they, whenever we talk about Za and Nukva, we're talking about how is God in us? How does God relate to us? In the most direct sense. And my building my partzuf of Za throughout my life is building my representation of God inside of me. It's what I would call, it's building my personality, my religious personality. In some ways, in a lot of ways, Za could be associated completely with the divine soul. It's one of the best ways to think of it, that I'm building my divine soul, or I'm building the divine presence within me. One of the things he shows is that these partzufim, personas, have a relationship to one another. Just as the sfirot have a relationship to one another through the body, the Arizal uses the body as a map to define the relationship between these different partzufim. And one of the things that he teaches is, Za is like in the chest, let's call it, of the full figure of who I am. So Za is like the heart, in a certain sense. That's why a lot of times we say Za, Zer and Pin, the small continents, this representation of God, is equivalent to the sphere of Tiferet. Because he's in the chest. It doesn't mean he doesn't have a head, but that's where he's predominantly. So now this is a little confusing, but if I take the whole corpus of the body, and I say, where are the different partzufim? So Za would be in my chest. I also have Arich, who's in my head, and I have above that Atik, who's above me. I have Chochma and Bina, who's also in my head. I have all the partzufim inside of me in some way. Again, it's not me. It's the form of man. So he says Za is predominantly in the chest, and his Nukva is behind him, and her crown reaches his chest. Okay? This has a lot to do with a lot of things. Many of the kavanot have to do with giving from Za to Nukva. For instance, the one that we do a lot. We don't know that that's what a lot of people, we don't know that's what we're doing. When we say Kiddush, we raise the cup by three hand breadths. Shaloshat fachim. Why? So he says, raising it like that is bringing the cup up to the crown of Nukva behind me, and that's who I'm giving the Kiddush to, as it were. What does that mean? What am I doing? But I'm doing something to my female counterpart, to my feminine aspect. I'm giving it the wine. I'm giving it, not the wine itself, I'm not interested so much in the wine. It's like a kos shel bracha. What do you do with a kos shel bracha? At the end of the meal, what are you supposed to do with it? Halachically. No, before you drink it. No, you don't do it. You first of all, l'shager kos shel bracha, it says. To give the cup of blessing to my wife, first of all. What? But I have to give her also. So he says it's the same thing. When I'm making Kiddush, I'm giving it also to my female counterpart as well. That's in me already. But it's like giving it to another example. The other example, the other strong example he gives. We all know we have a crown on our head that we put tefillin on. Whose crown is that? So in the Arizal's world, when you say crown, you say, whose crown? Wait a minute. You're putting on whose head is this on here? He says this is on the head of Zah. Zah's crown is the tefillin, is the head of tefillin. What about my hand tefillin? What's that doing there? It's on the crown of my feminine counterpart. Because that's the height. That's where it is. But she's behind me, as it were. Again, it's not me. It's the form of the human. But it's easier for me to explain it like on my body. So you look at it, it's exactly there. I'm tying a crown around her head. I can't tie it entirely around the head, so I do it here. But that's some of the ideas. There's many ideas how to interpret this. In Chasidus, this is discussed a number of times, not just once. And you have to think about what does it mean actually, that Zah gives his chest is her crown. She's standing behind his crown. She's not always at that height. Sometimes she's lower. And sometimes, and that's the real goal, is that she rises to be his height exactly. She rises to be higher. That's called the rise of the feminine in Kabbalah.
Would that be like a unity?
And then they're equal. Then they share one crown. Gotcha. But as long as they have this discrepancy between them, she only reaches the height of his chest, and he's higher, his head is higher, so then they are two crowns. Where did this obviously all come from? It came from the beginning of creation, where the moon came and said, there's Mrs. Medrash. The Arizal's trying to understand the Medrash. And there's many counterparts to it again in the Zohar that make this fit a lot of the passages in the Zohar. And so he says, what does it mean that she said, two kings can't use the same crown? It means they were the same height. So what did God say? Lessen yourself. What does it mean, lessen yourself? That the highest level she usually reaches is his chest. And so she needs a separate crown. You didn't want to use the same crown. You said you can't be the same stature. Okay, so lessen yourself. Use a separate crown.
The reason using imagery of human body comes from the fact that it says man was created in the image of Hashem.
Yeah, because that form is considered to be the highest form. And also because it says in Job, from my body I envision God. It doesn't mean that my body is God. It means that I use my body's form in order to envision, in order to try to put together a system with which all the different ideal ideas or these ideal pictures of these powers, these faculties, comes together into something coherent. And we have to end now. So that was a little bit, but let's say, anyway, what does he do? When she's at that stature, from his loving kindness, his chesed. I'm not going to call it loving kindness anymore, just going to call it chesed, because we all know what it means. From his chesed, and there are 5 aspects of chesed that he has, one for each sfira, from chesed until hod, hamelubash betiferet, that is enclosed within his chest. That's where, because the chest is where these sfirot are. It's like within the torso. He's talking about it like the torso. Mitchalek lishnei chatzain. It divides into 2. Now, one of the most interesting principles in Kabbalah is that when you divide something into 2, you get a third and 2/3. How do you like that? Where in the world is it that when you divide something into 2, you get a third and 2/3? That's called, in the non-Jewish world, the Fibonacci. It's related to the Fibonacci series of numbers. It's called the golden ratio. The golden ratio says, and very simply, why is this? Because geometrically, if I draw a line, if I take this line, let's say this is the line, and I tell you, cut this line exactly where it feels the best for you. Don't go by eyesight. Don't try to cut it where you think the middle is. Cut it where it feels the best. It's a different sense I'm tapping into. It's a sense of the aesthetic. And so most people will cut it here, meaning they'll cut it into 1/3 and 2/3, approximately. Why is that? Where did that come from? It's easier to show with a rectangle. If I show you a square is sharp and not well balanced. But if I show you a Fibonacci or a golden ratio based rectangle where how do you say tzela in English? Well, where this side is is approximately 2/3 of this side, you'll feel that this stands much, much better.
I see. Yeah.
Now, if you look at classical Roman architecture, they were geniuses in this. They received it from the Greeks. It's called the golden ratio, and they knew it very well. It's called the number phi. So everything in Roman architecture is based on this. So if you go on the internet, you'll see, you look up golden ratio, Roman architecture, you'll see everything in the Parthenon, everything everywhere. In Greece and in Rome and throughout the classical world, everything was based on this key ratio. And it's exactly 1.618. Well, can't say it exactly because it's an irrational number. It keeps going. But it's the number whose reciprocal is equal to itself. What does that mean? If x is a number, 1 over x is the reciprocal. Okay? This is the only number that x equals 1 over x. How could that possibly be? No, sorry. I said it wrong. It's x minus 1 equals 1 over x. Meaning I take 1 off of x, I'll get the reciprocal of x. The two numbers are 1.618, but take off 1, I get 0.618, which is equal to 1 divided by 1.618. And of course it continues on.
Wow.
So it's a very, very special number. There's whole societies in mathematics devoted to studying this number. And in the Arizal, this is one of the most important numbers. He never mentions it by name, but it was known to the entire... And when you start looking in the Torah, you see that everything is full of this number.
Wow.
Rav Ginsburg has thousands, literally thousands and thousands of phenomena in the Torah that are mathematical phenomena that are related to this number. Okay, so when you divide it in two, you get 1/3 and 2/3, and we'll see how tomorrow. God willing.
Is it in 2 weeks?
You're leaving.